great dishes usually belong to one homeland. We look for pasta in Italy. We look for sushi in Japan. But there is one unique dish that has become a true citizen of the world. It is served in roadside diners in Texas, at gala dinners in Paris, in canteens in Hong Kong, and on the beaches of Rio de Janeiro. Beef stroganoff. For millions of people, this is the taste of something familiar, something like home. But the paradox is that behind this simple recipe of meat in sauce lies an incredible destiny. It is a story of immense wealth and the loss of everything. A journey from a millionaire's palace to a soldier's mess kit. A story of how a recipe survived the chaos of a revolution, saved refugees in foreign lands, and conquered the West. So, brew some tea. Today we are going on a long journey through time. We will discover the secret ingredient that vanished from the recipe over the years, and we will understand why this dish is called a symbol of human generosity. Many people believe that the history of stroganoff began in cold, snowy St. Petersburg. But the archives point us to the south, to the shores of the Black Sea, to sunny port city Odessa in the mid-19th century. It was here that Count Alexander Stroganoff lived. A legendary figure. He belonged to one of the richest dynasties in Europe. A governor-general, a patron of the arts, a man who lived to be 95. But he went down in history not because of his titles, but because of his table. In Odessa, the Count kept what was called an open table. This was an amazing tradition of that era, one we have almost forgotten today. Imagine this. Any educated, decently dressed citizen could walk into the courtyard of the Count's house at lunchtime. The guest wasn't asked who he was. He didn't need an invitation. He simply sat down at the table, and he was fed. For free. It sounded noble. But for the chefs, it was a true challenge. Every day a stream of strangers. The kitchen needed to invent a dish that solved 3 problems. First, it had to be easy to portion. Frying steaks for an unpredictable number of guests was impossible. Second, it had to remain tasty and juicy, even if it stood for a while. And third, it had to look exquisite, as the Count's status demanded. And so, beef stroganoff was born. There is a touching legend that the Count lost his teeth in old age, and the cook invented soft meat especially for him. It's a beautiful version. It speaks of care. But historians lean toward a reason that is even nobler. This dish was born not out of frailty, but out of generosity of spirit. It was a way to feed many people without leaving anyone behind. But how did a homemade dish of a Russian count become known to the whole world? Here, France comes into play. In the 19th century, the aristocracy was closely tied to French culture. The best chefs from Paris worked in noble kitchens. The name itself, Beef Stroganoff, is French. And the cooking technique was classic French, browning flour, the complex work with sauces. But the products were local, thick sour cream, beef, mustard. It was the perfect culinary marriage of 2 cultures. The key moment came in 1891. A talented French chef named Charles Brière was working in St. Petersburg. He was so impressed by the potential of this dish that he decided to present it to an international audience. Brière sent the recipe to Paris, to the most influential gastronomic magazine of that era, La Culinaire. The dish was presented at a competition, and Parisian gourmets, who were usually skeptical of foreign cuisine, were conquered. Charles Brière literally gave beef stroganoff an international passport. Thanks to him, the dish came to be considered haute cuisine in Europe. let's stop for a minute and peek into the cooking pot of that time. If you order beef stroganoff in a restaurant today, you will almost certainly be brought meat with mushrooms and onions. But if we found ourselves at the table in 1861, the taste of the dish would surprise us. In the very first recorded recipe by Elena Molokovitz, there are no mushrooms and no onions. The meat was not cut into long strips, but into small cubes. But the main nuance, which disappeared from mass recipes over time, lay in the spices. First, Sarepta mustard. The cook added a spoonful of hot mustard directly into the sour cream. It acted as an emulsifier, keeping the sauce from splitting, and added a piquant heat. Second, English allspice. It gave the meat a warm, spicy aroma, reminiscent of clove and cinnamon. It was a complex, multifaceted combination. Mushrooms and onions appeared in the recipe much later, in the 20th century, when the dish became mass-produced, and portions needed to be larger and more affordable. It seemed the dish had a brilliant future in the best salons of Europe. But then came 1917. The revolution. The world that created beef stroganoff collapsed. The palaces stood empty. The tradition of open tables vanished. The Great Exodus began. Millions of people were forced to flee their homes. And a huge part of the emigrants went not to Paris, but to the east, to China, to Harbin and Shanghai. Imagine the situation of these people. Former countesses, officers, engineers found themselves in a foreign land, having lost everything. To survive, they opened tiny canteens and restaurants. It was in Shanghai that beef stroganoff underwent its major transformation. In China, potatoes were not a staple food, but rice and noodles were everywhere. The cooks adapted to the new conditions. They began serving creamy meat over crispy Chinese noodles or white rice. It was a forced fusion, a dish of survival. In the 1930s, American regiments, diplomats, and merchants were stationed in Shanghai. They often visited these Russian establishments, and they fell in love with this taste. For a foreign soldier, it was hearty, understandable, and incredibly delicious. When they returned to the United States before World War II, they brought the recipe with them. That is how stroganoff came to America. Not across the Atlantic, but across the Pacific. Once in the New World, the dish began to live a life of its own. In America in the 50s, in the era of industrialization, housewives were looking for quick solutions. The Campbell's Company proposed a simple recipe on a can of mushroom soup. Mix the meat and the contents of the can. So the exquisite sauce became simpler, and the dish turned into cozy, domestic comfort food. But the journey didn't end there. Look at Brazil. There, estrogonofe is one of the main festive dishes. But Brazilians added their own temperament. Tomato paste for color and potato sticks on top for the crunch. And in Sweden, they invented korv stroganoff. Swedes replaced expensive beef with local sausages falukorv. And now, it is the favorite dinner of every Swedish schoolchild. Some might say this is a distortion of the original. But perhaps Count Stroganoff would have treated this with a smile. After all, his dream came true. His idea to feed people deliciously and satisfyingly conquered time and borders. The history of beef stroganoff is more than just cooking. It is a living thread connecting eras. It stretches from the sunny courtyards of old Odessa, through Parisian restaurants and the noisy streets of Shanghai, right to your table. Empires vanish and borders are redrawn, but this recipe, born of hospitality and saved by human resilience, continues to live. It teaches us that true taste has no nationality. And even in the most difficult times far from home, one can find solace in a simple plate of hot food. So today, when you cook dinner, remember what a long journey this taste has made. And maybe add a little spoonful of mustard. Bon appétit!